So here's a big question, one that's probably on your mind a lot lately. Is the world getting more violent? About a decade ago, it really looked like the answer was a clear no. But today? Well, today we're going to put that hopeful prediction to the test. Welcome to The Explainer. All right, let's just dive right in. I want to start with the big picture here. Why does it feel like we're living in a much more dangerous world these days? I mean, you turn on the news, right? You see Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the war between Israel and Hamas. It's just dominating everything. So yeah, of course it feels that way. It's so easy to just assume, wow, things are worse than they have ever been. But what does the actual evidence, the hard data from the last 10 years, really tell us? If you rewind to 2014, all the data was pointing in one direction, a pretty clear downward trend in violent conflict. It really felt like that old saying was true, that the arc of history was bending towards peace. But fast forward to today and the reality of 2024, it just feels completely different. So let's find out, has that optimistic arc been shattered? Okay, so before we get into the cold, hard numbers, let's kind of map out this last decade of conflict. What were the big wars? The ones that really define this period, and honestly, reshaped the world we're living in. Yeah, the conflict map has just been in constant motion. It's wild. While some really devastating wars, like the one in Syria, have finally ended or cooled down, it seems like new ones have just erupted to take their place. We've seen these absolutely brutal civil wars in places like Ethiopia and Sudan, and waves of insurgencies sweeping across parts of Africa. But the most shocking thing, the thing that really changed the game, it's the return of full-scale wars between nations. That's something so many experts thought was a thing of the past, a relic of history. So that's let's call it the geographic story, the map of conflict. But the numbers behind these wars tell an even more dramatic and, frankly, a much scarier story. Let's actually quantify the last 10 years. Okay, so let's look at the decade before our story begins. Between 2004 and 2014, conflicts between states caused around 350,000 deaths. And look, that's a horrific number, no question about it. But at the time, it was seen as part of a much bigger picture, a long-term decline in violence. Now, let's look at the decade we're talking about today, from 2014 to 2024. That number just skyrocketed. We're talking 1.5 million deaths. This is not just a little bump. This is a complete, catastrophic reversal of that trend toward peace we were just talking about. I mean, just look at that. The contrast really couldn't be any clearer, could it? The last 10 years have been so much deadlier than the decade before. And get this, in 2022, mostly because of the wars in Ethiopia and Ukraine, the world saw the highest death toll from conflict since the Rwandan genocide back in 1994. Think about that for a second. So, okay, with all this grim data in mind, how did those specific predictions we made back in 2014 actually hold up? It's time to check the scorecard. And, well, the verdict is pretty sobering. Our prediction of fewer conflict deaths? That was false. Our hope for no more interstate wars? Also false. And what about civil wars ending through diplomacy? Nope, false again. There is one little bright spot in all of this, though. The idea that democracies don't fight each other? That one is still holding true, at least for now. Look, a massive reversal like this, it doesn't just happen by accident, right? This can't be a coincidence. It forces us to ask a really critical question. What fundamentally changed? What happened in the world to cause this huge surge in violence? For a long time after the Cold War ended, the world kind of placed a big bet on something called the rules-based world order. The whole idea was pretty simple, really. A system of international laws, agreements, and institutions would keep the peace and prevent major wars. And you know what? For a while, it really seemed like it was working. But that system is now being challenged, seriously challenged. We're in the middle of this massive transition, moving away from a unipolar world, where one superpower, the US, basically set the agenda, to a multipolar world. And in this new era, you have multiple big powers, the US, China, Russia, and others, all competing for influence, forging new alliances, and, well, they're not afraid to challenge the old rules. And this great power competition, it isn't some abstract academic concept. It is actively fueling wars on the ground. You've got external powers like Iran, Saudi Arabia, China, and the US arming different sides in conflicts. The superpowers are in a new arms race. Just look at how China's military budget is surging. And then you have Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which just completely shattered the taboo against wars of conquest. That single act has sparked a wave of rearmament all across Europe, and it's making dozens of old, simmering border disputes dangerously hot again. Okay, so we've looked at the conflicts, we've seen the staggering numbers, and we've talked about the huge global shifts that are driving all this. So let's bring it all together. What does it all mean? Where do we actually stand today? This is a really crucial paradox, and it's one we have to get our heads around. If you look at the grand scheme of things, the long, incredibly brutal arc of human history, we are still living in a relatively peaceful time. I mean, world wars killed tens of millions. The death tolls today, as absolutely tragic as they are not at that level. But, and this is the part you really have to pay attention to, the trend is now moving sharply and scarily in the wrong direction. So it seems that optimistic arc of peace, the one that really defined the whole post-Cold War era, that arc might be broken. It appears to be over, and the last 3 years in particular have been alarmingly violent. So that leaves us at a crossroads with this huge, critical question for the next decade. Is this spike in violence just a brutal, terrible anomaly? Or is this the new normal?